From deep in the woods of Pittsfield Township, Michigan, it's the Grace and Paul Pottscast. She's a left-wing Catholic homeschooler who loves to garden. He's a bearded computer geek who reads and writes like he's running out of time. Together, they're raising an army of adorable children and planning the revolution. The less we say about it, the better. We'll make it up as we go along. Feet on the ground, head in the sky. It's okay, I know nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong. Oh, it's over.
Sweet.
It's over.
That was it.
No, I just was, I was like, I should sing along. Except I didn't want to start with the start of the verse, so that's the second half of the verse. But we're probably about to get sued. Like David Byrne himself is going to come to our house with an army of lawyers. Yeah, right.
Right there at the door.
Okay, so can you hear okay?
I can hear fine. Is that true? Yeah, no, I can hear.
Because we can adjust your volume. We are testing out a new, I say new rig, but really it's just a new arrangement of wires and stuff.
It's a new arrangement.
And boxes. Some boxes are different. Some boxes are the same. I'm doing stuff. Anyway, I will actually, I'm not going to talk about it at length here because most of you will be bored out of your skull. But I will write a newsletter/blog post at some point because I think it's an interesting setup. And the key thing that I'm trying to do is actually be able to mix down while we talk, right? To get to get like a compressed mix right into the recorder. And that supposedly will save me could save me quite a bit of post-processing time.
Right.
But I'm only going to do that if it actually sounds good when I get to the final product. Otherwise, I'll be messing around with it for my usual
hours,
mastering process and all that. So anyway, we are back after another long, mostly unintentional hiatus. It's very warm today.
Yes, very warm.
Grace is just like sweat running off the end of her nose.
And all I did was sit outside in the shade.
In the shade. It is not yet June. We are coming to you on my vacation day for the year, Memorial Day. I guess I get the 4th off too. But the thing is, it's become, hey, this job has unlimited PTO, right? It comes with unlimited paid time off.
What that actually means.
What that actually means is you have to negotiate like hell to take any time off other than the holidays.
Other than the 10 required holidays. Yeah,
and I don't even know if it's 10, but, and your boss wants you to be make sure all your work is covered so you don't affect the schedule at all by taking days off. And so basically you have to be weeks ahead, like a week ahead if you want a week off, and negotiate with your coworkers to cover your obligations and okay.
Yeah, what? Thanks, everybody.
So basically I'm not saying this is my only summer vacation, but I will probably only be able to take dribs and drabs off, which is unfortunately the same as it was at my last job.
Same as it ever was. Right?
Same as it ever was. Speaking of David Byrne. Anyway, today is Memorial Day, and it is over 90. And we were doing I was doing a little work in the garden. Grace was sitting in the shade, but we're trying to get back in the podcasting thing. Yeah. And we're trying to return to the conversation that we were having starting last year.
Yeah.
And
not quite a year ago, but
yes,
but a long time ago.
It's coming up. It'll soon be a year ago. Basically, we were covering the Delta wave and the response to it in the media, and a whole lot of articles. And you've been kind of mad because you had a whole conclusion to bring together to bring this whole thing to a close. But what really happened is we had more terrible, weird news every time.
Every time.
And so I would drag us into these digressions about that. Plus, I think we wanted to talk about what was happening. We want to talk about a
lot of stuff, too. Yeah.
But then we never really brought that arc to a close, which is frustrating. But so I am doing. I'm just a public accountability here. I'm going to do my best for a while to let you talk and try not to constantly drag the conversation into digressions. I'm not very good at this because I apparently love to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
So
And like me, your team digression.
yes,
Half the conversation is digressions.
But
that's everyone's talking about how that's an ADHD thing now.
well, you know what?
I always just thought it was charming.
I've basically now self-diagnosed as an adult high-functioning autistic with ADHD tendencies, and basically it explains a hell of a lot about my whole life. I've always thought that I might be slightly that way, but I'm like, no, I just learned early on to mask. I don't like rock or flap my arms or whatnot or talk to myself quite. I don't do these typically
Autistic things so freely.
But I'm thinking back, I'm pretty sure that I used to.
Oh, right.
So, and I'm trying to do them again because they soothe me.
Because they soothe you. Was that a thing that class we took, online class we took, was that a turning point for you?
It certainly, it was not like the genesis of this belief, of this conviction.
No, you've been talking about it for a bit.
Yeah, but it certainly helped cement some behaviors. And I'm like, when they're describing certain behaviors, I'm like, yeah. It wasn't specifically a class about autism in adults.
No, it was in children and sort of like supporting them where they are.
Yeah. The other thing that's happened is I have a kind of a support group. Like, I mean, even though I never see people in person at work because I work almost entirely from home, there's an online, it's called an affinity group. Affinity Resource Group, something like that, ARG, whatever it means. But it's an online group, and they meet weekly, and they have book clubs. They also get together in person for game nights and stuff like that. But it's called the neuro group, and it means for the neurodivergents and those who want to support them.
Not the neurotypicals per se.
Correct.
But neurotypicals want to support and enjoy hanging out with neurodivergent people. Right.
And it's been very interesting to talk to some of the people in this group, the guy that founded it, and see myself, see like a lot of my characteristics reflected back at me, and be like, oh, yes.
I get it now.
Yes. And, I probably people who actually know me in person are like, yeah, you've always been weird.
You've always been weird, what?
but I finally like, you know what, I've never officially diagnosed, so I should just, and I'm allowed to diagnose myself. It's been 55 years. I think I've got a pretty good idea what I'm like by now.
Well, yeah, you definitely have a lot of data to assess.
Yeah. I mean, I've been told that I have obsessive compulsive personality disorder. I've been diagnosed with major depression in the past, but I think the real who I am is these autistic traits that I was born with. So
fair enough.
Okay, sorry. Anyway, Delta.
Yeah, so back
now
to
there
Delta.
were 20 varieties.
Yeah. 20 flavors later.
Right.
But
I think Rocky Road myself. Have you tried the Rocky Road COVID? Or we're in Michigan, we get the Moose Tracks COVID.
Moose Tracks COVID. Or what about the Superman COVID?
Superman COVID. Yeah, the kids love that.
Superman COVID. Oh, good gravy. This is where we are with COVID. It's gotten this is the paunchy stage of COVID. We were talking at the time about how Delta changed everything, and I had 3 main points that I think are the most important things to say. There are lots of things to say, and I have lots of notes here about all kinds of other things to say. Mm-hmm. But there are 3 things that I think I really wanted to drive home, and that I think was more important than anything else. Number 1, this is not and never has been a matter of personal responsibility and choice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just not possible.
Well, it's possible.
Well, if a person has a lot of resources and is willing to forgo their social interactions indefinitely, you can stay safe. You've also cut yourself off from many, many things, often including basic services. Like
medical care.
Let's say you can't get medical care. Let's say you can't get groceries without being inadvertently exposed,
Right.
So, I mean, Yeah, theoretically possible.
Well, I guess that's the thing. What I'm getting at is that not so much theoretically possible. We can leave this up to personal choice.
Oh, we as a society can claim that it really should be this way.
Choose your own adventure.
It this way. Yeah.
Choose your, do your thing. Here's a few scraps of information. Do what you like.
Yeah. So,
right?
You decided to fly because you needed to fly for your work? Or you decided to go to the conference because your academic career depended on interviewing at a conference?
Right. That's on you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you decided to go teach your class full of students because
you needed to pay the rent? That's on you.
It goes on and on.
Right?
It's all on you.
So, and I have to say here, at the outset of the pandemic, a lot of people were crowing about how a let it rip policy as Sweden was immoral. And I asked them to stand down with that rhetoric at that time. Because it is essentially a pro-choice policy, choose your own adventure policy, and I wanted to think carefully if they really want to stand behind that as being immoral. And I gotta say, speaking broadly, I think that's an immoral policy because I think pro-choice policy is wrong. But if you think that a pro-choice policy is a good thing or a moral thing, think carefully about what you're saying when you want to say that people can embrace that writ large. Mm-hmm. That was the conversation I had early on. And people were like, what the hell do you mean? I'm like, what did we just talk about moments ago in this conversation? Well, if you choose to work.
Right. I
mean, that's your call.
Right. Yeah.
No conversation about.
Of course, everyone, society, everyone, liberal, conservative, whatever, will criticize you for dereliction of every responsibility. If you take your kids out of school, if you take
your kids out of school, if one of you stops working,
if you stop working, so that you're not stocking the shelves at your Walmart or
right,
inconveniencing, the wheels, like
the wheels of commerce,
grinding sand into the wheels of commerce and the wheels of capitalism.
For folks who are closer to the margins, there is no choice.
No, absolutely not.
Right? So it's really a false policy to say that we're giving people choices.
I mean, if you think about, I always try to turn your focus towards the people that are the most underprivileged. And
absolutely.
One of the people that I think about are the people who died in the meat packing plants.
Mary, Jesus, and John,
where the managers insisted on a let her rip policy, and we now know that they were placing bets on how many
people would die.
People would die on the floor.
It was grotesque.
Yes.
And I don't mean the slaughterhouse.
Yeah. Right. So it gives new meaning to meat is murder,
Absolutely. So really, my first point, it's not a matter of personal responsibility. It's a matter of governance and leadership. It's a policy matter, not a personal responsibility matter. Full stop. And really, if you think closely about it, it can't be anything else unless you want to adopt a let it rip policy, which at the very beginning, most of us agreed was a horrendous approach.
Right. Well, Sweden had this theory that we actually could achieve herd immunity quickly. Yes. They could.
Right.
And so they were going to basically say, let's protect the most vulnerable based on who we thought was the most vulnerable, the most vulnerable at the time.
Right.
And everyone else would just get sick and get herd immunity, and their losses in the less vulnerable population would be minimal.
And I think if we didn't have any data from SARS-1,
right, that almost made sense.
It almost makes sense.
Yeah.
That it's an alternative policy. It puts people at risk unnecessarily, I'd say. But it does put people at risk and takes some pretty big gambles. But I think if we consider the whole sweep of human history, it's that gamble that we've evolved through.
Yeah.
So that in a vacuum, I want to say, it's not necessarily 100% just an immoral thing. But we did have data from SARS-1. We did have data from China. We did have a fair amount of data about what happened to people. And unless you have some kind of hermetic seal around the people, and you're going to form a pod of just the people that are interacting with vulnerable populations, and feed them and house them and fund them for this entire period, I don't think that's actually a coherent policy. Right. And I think Sweden did some of those things and not all of those things. And I think Sweden let it run wild through their young children whose parents chose to send them to school.
Right.
And we're seeing some of the consequences now.
Yeah, they also wound up, people visit their elderly in the state of,
that was the hermetic
homes.
seal part.
Right.
So unless you're going to say, okay, no one's going to visit.
No one goes in or out. Well, then people work there.
Right.
A
hermetic seal. No one goes in or out unless that's the strategy.
Right.
And like I said, they did some things, but not all.
They did some strong mitigations to try to keep those, you call them congregate settings.
Yeah. They did some mitigations.
Congregate living or something.
But the carnage was pretty bad.
Yep.
And they're having some long-term sequelae in children now that they did not see coming. Right. And that's sort of the thing that I think, had this been completely, and I'm actually adding a small piece of information that I did not have when I wrote this into this conversation. This understanding that a lot of the data from SARS-1 is applicable here now, because this is SARS-2.
Right.
I think we called it COVID-19 as a PR thing, so people didn't connect the two, right?
Well, I don't know that it was necessarily intended that they wouldn't connect the two, but I think we were making a very clear distinction that this is a new thing.
This is a new thing.
They called it the novel coronavirus as well.
In other words, it wasn't the SARS virus, but just circulating again.
Yeah, I think if they had just said SARS-2, people were like, oh, SARS was fine. Right.
Except it wasn't.
Well, the reason that we think it was fine is because the mitigations were so extreme that they worked.
Yes.
That's not widely understood.
That's not widely understood. That Asia really fought like hell and won.
Right. Mention your friend who came to visit us in 2003.
It was 2003. Came on the plane. She and her mother had gone to, I think, China as visitors.
We picked her up. We gave her a ride from the airport.
No, we
just met her.
We just met her at the airport because she was passing through Detroit.
To say hi.
To say hello.
And she wore a mask the whole time.
Wore a mask with the whole interaction, etc. And adopted that as a rational norm.
Right.
For a respiratory disease.
Right, because people around her in Asia at the time were masking.
Were masking all the time.
With good reason.
With good reason to suppress the virus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then similarly, there were also airline regulations that they had to mask coming from China.
Right. They literally made it mandatory.
They made it mandatory, so that was required. And they couldn't take it off like in the airport. Like when they went home, do what you want, but here, we're not having transmissions here.
Right.
And that was 2003. And there is a lot of data, and we did learn a lot. If we had respect for Asian scientists and the data that they have and are happy to share with us internationally, Sweden would have been making decisions like that ideally. But perhaps they would have made the same decisions, but it seems unconscionable that they would have made the same decisions looking at data from SARS-1. That said, there's some subtleties here. And I think the terms that people are using in the press right now are eradication, elimination, mitigation, and sort of a fourth category that people don't name, which is the let it rip category. Like it's unspoken.
Well, it's
a policy decision.
I would call it the endemic phase, the endemic endemicization, or the claimed endemic phase.
That's why that's not a thing.
But it still counts on it. It's not a thing because it counts on effective immunity.
Well, exactly. So, like, the narrative is this narrative of claimed endemicity, but
Basically you're saying it's endemic now, and if you just get it, you'll be protected, and it's also not severe. It goes along with sort of the mild ideology.
Right? Well, there are a number of diseases. This is the sort of quiet part out loud thing about endemicity that the public health people aren't saying. Mm-hmm. When we say that tuberculosis is endemic in Africa,
right?
When we say that monkeypox is endemic in Africa,
right?
What we mean is it kills them all the time and we don't do anything.
Right. Right. It's not the same as the common cold is endemic.
Which the common cold is also endemic.
Correct.
In Western cultures.
But we find
countries,
it tolerable. We don't, we don't enforce statewide lockdowns to try and in cold season to try and stop the spread of rhinovirus.
Right. Or the flu, which does kill people, right?
The flu does kill people.
We do have a hard pressed vaccination program around the flu, but that's about it.
Yeah,
that's about it.
It's not, again, it's not terribly effective, and the effectiveness certainly varies from season to season, but it does help.
The effectiveness varies from season to season with the flu vaccine,
yes,
right? Because they basically try to guess in advance what strain we're going to get and produce the right
in time to
bring it to market for people to take it for that season. And sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're wrong.
Yeah.
But that said, there's a persistent effectiveness in congregate settings for the flu vaccine. So, a lot of anti-vaxxers will say the flu doesn't work. The only place it's been proven to have effectiveness is in congregate settings.
Right? The flu vaccine doesn't work.
Right. The flu, and now that's almost right. But I think the perspective...
in a congregate setting, all you really have to do is bring the R value down
exactly
a little bit.
And that's what it does.
Yes.
And that's what saves lives in congregate settings.
Right.
And so when you
just have to get it below 1 on average, and then it burns out pretty quickly in a given setting.
Right. So the thing is, that's a more or less true statement, right? Mm-hmm. But the framing is wrong. Mm-hmm. The people that we want to protect from the flu are people that live in congregate settings.
Yes, and
that is the only place where it shows effectiveness.
Well, and they also, it's hardly an anti-vax argument, because one of the reasons that it works in these settings is that the people in these settings are rightly somewhat afraid of the flu, and they are pretty diligent about getting their vaccines.
Right. But then the context in which the argument is used is, so I and my children need to get a flu vaccine for them to attend school or for whatever.
Yes.
Fill in the blank.
Yes.
And frequently there'll be some pushback from some nurses about getting a flu vaccine to continue working. Mm-hmm. And what we have done that's been very effective in the past is that anyone who is not vaccinated against the flu has to wear a mask at work during flu season. Mm-hmm.
That seems honestly completely reasonable to me.
Right? And it was before 2020. Before March 2020, it was a completely rational and reasonable thing, right?
Right.
That anybody who could potentially infect someone else would have to wear a mask. So we've used it in our own culture.
Right. And but this only works because we believe, and we have evidence that the flu virus is somewhat effective. So this combination of most people are vaccinated, the ones that aren't use a mask, brings the R value down low enough that it's not a tremendous risk.
Tremendous risk, right?
Right.
And so the context where the argument is used is, why do I, who is not a nurse, do not work in a congregate setting as children, probably don't even attend school, maybe. Mm-hmm. It's not just
I don't have young children.
Don't have young children. Why do I need to get a flu vaccine? It doesn't even work. The only place it's been shown to be effective is in congregate settings.
Right.
That's the argument, right? And I said with slightly different framing,
it could work elsewhere.
Right?
Yes.
So that said, this isn't supposed to be a stump for the flu vaccine or not, but just that it is this vulnerable population for whom that we want to protect,
right,
whom it benefits,
right,
and that's why it exists,
right.
There are other sort of ring vaccination strategies for people who are vulnerable and outside of congregate settings.
You might need to explain what a ring I know what it is, but what a ring vaccine strategy is.
So a ring vaccination strategy is you have a population that is at risk,
right,
and so everyone who might come into contact with that population gets a vaccination. So you vaccinate a ring of the population that connects
it's like a firewall.
A firewall around the individual or the population.
Yeah. In some settings, they even do this with an outbreak, right?
Yes.
Like in the middle of an outbreak.
In the middle of an outbreak, like say there's a measles outbreak, you would vaccinate the individuals involved, like say their family members and whatnot, and then you would vaccinate any healthcare workers they might come into contact with.
Into contact,
right?
With. But that requires a lot of contact tracing, and it requires people not to be so defiant of public health measures, right?
I mean, details, but yes.
Yeah.
So those are the frames we're using now. Eradication, elimination, mitigation, and then I'm just calling it the wibbly wobbly space. Endemicity, I think, is something as a word with specific meaning that
and it's being used.
And it's being used
misleadingly
and loosely in this setting. So when we talk about eradication, we eradicated smallpox. Mm-hmm. We're no longer vaccinating people for it because it doesn't exist anymore. It's
an interesting case study because I have a scar and you don't.
And I don't.
And we're about 5 years apart in age.
Right.
And so, everyone in my cohort, I'll be 55 in the fall, right? Mm-hmm. Is that right?
That's right.
And but people, I don't know exactly what year they stopped, but somewhere.
They stopped broadly in 1980. There were pockets of vaccinations after 1980, I believe, in the Soviet Union. But broadly, vaccinations more or less stopped in 1980.
Okay, well, because I would have gotten it, it would have been around 1974, 73, something like that. I think I was probably around 8 or 9, because I'm old enough to remember it clearly.
And the smallpox vaccine was actually, compared to many vaccines we're used to getting in recent history, like the last 20 years, it was relatively dangerous.
It was. It actually was quite painful to receive.
It's painful to receive.
It's a strange way of administering it.
Right. And many people developed eczema and sores.
Yeah.
As a
it certainly had more.
It was a live vaccine.
Yeah.
Right. So that's eradication. We will fight this till it's gone. No virus left standing.
Right.
Okay, that's eradication. Elimination is that strategy in a region. So a specific region says, okay, not here, not past this border. Yeah. Okay. That was effectively more or less New Zealand's strategy, which I've talked about a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. And then mitigation is, okay, we have treatment, we have vaccination, we have a mitigation strategy with the flu. Mm-hmm. We try to mitigate its effect. And we're
not actually trying to eradicate the flu. It's probably not possible. I mean, it would require extreme lockdowns.
It would require some significant intervention.
Right.
However, you say extreme lockdowns. The United States never, in no part of the United States, do we have an extreme lockdown.
We'd have to do, what I'm saying is we'd have to do something that we've never quite done before, with the possible exception of the 1918 flu in some areas.
But,
with the possible exception of certain years during the polio pandemic.
So we reached that kind of intervention in pockets at points during 1918 and the polio epidemic. However, what we actually did do did in fact drive certain strains of the flu to extinction.
I'm not upset.
We didn't do it. We didn't do it that long.
Like,
compared to like how virulent and far the flu reaches.
That's true. That's a good indication that actually an extreme, like a severe lockdown, is not required to kill a flu strain.
Because
we saw it happen.
We killed several.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm always
to clarify. You mean during 2020?
During 2020 and part of 2021.
The amount of social distancing, mask mandates, and restrictions that were in place actually wound up pretty much wiping out a couple of flu strains.
Flu. We'll never see them again. They're gone.
That's
So I always kind of hesitate when people say, "Oh, well, you can't do anything about."
Well, they say lockdowns don't work, and I'm like, well,
ask the flu that.
Right. I mean, it didn't eliminate all
the
varieties.
Flu. It didn't eliminate all varieties and strains of influenza.
Considering also that it's constantly churning everywhere around the world. Not just here.
Taking that into consideration, it's actually amazing.
Yes.
That we wiped out several strains. Yeah. So, and that's mitigation. And what we're doing now is we're actually not taking precautions to mitigate COVID specifically?
We think we are,
A
but
lot of
what
people
we're
think they are.
doing is not actually effective mitigation.
Right. These aren't effective mitigations against COVID.
Right.
Right.
Those,
So I see
hand
people.
sanitizer and vaccines.
Right, hand sanitizer, vaccines, walking into the building with a mask and taking it off to eat,
Right.
and then putting the mask back on.
Yes.
These are not actually.
Certainly not against. I mean, maybe that was more effective with wild type COVID or alpha because it was a little less virulent.
I've been very careful to say that COVID is airborne
Yes.
and not to tell people to stop washing their hands because
Right, sure.
that
Sure.
was an effective intervention against the flu.
Right.
It is an effective intervention against rhinovirus.
Yes.
And especially if you have anyone who will put strange things in their mouths,
Yeah.
it's
If
an
you
effective
could-
intervention to wash things.
If you could see them, that would blow people's minds
Yes.
because it would be like, oh, COVID is like, these are like grains of sand and here's a rhinovirus and it's like a beach ball.
Yes.
Like they're that different,
That different.
in scale and the way they behave physically
Right.
in the air.
It's absolutely absurd.
It's bonkers.
So I've been very careful ever since the conversation started about, oh, you don't need to wash everything. Oh, you don't need to wash your hands. Well, actually, you should wash your hands.
You always needed to wash your
You
hands.
always need to wash your hands. If you've started, please don't stop.
Yes.
But that is not an effective COVID mitigation.
Yeah, but I mean,
Right?
go get dirty too because that's actually good for your immune
that's really
system.
good for
in
your immune
many-
system
in many
and for your gut
cases.
bacteria.
Right.
Fantastic.
Go get dirty, but then wash your hands before you eat.
Yes, please. Wash your hands before you eat, after you use the restroom, whenever you sneeze, before you prepare food.
Especially if
Vital.
you're around mouse poop and stuff.
Oh,
fun stuff
absolutely.
like that.
All kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of stuff everywhere, and that's why everyone needs to do it. But we're not engaging any effective COVID mitigations. And I include vaccinations in that because what the vaccinations actually mitigate
Yes.
is hospital
Right.
beds.
Right.
The vaccination mitigates the
that's-
number of hospital beds. in
That's
use.
what's left, and it really does lower the severe acute disease phase.
Yes.
It really does that. But it's
But it does not stop transmission, and it does not stop you from getting sick. I want to say at least 50% of the time.
it's hard to get numbers that you feel confident in because the studies are all over the map.
They're all over the map.
And they're highly politicized and argued about.
And they change with every variant.
And they change with every variant.
Okay.
But I would say like it prevents illness somewhere between 30% and
I am confident to say-
60% of the time.
I'm confident to say on the record
Yeah.
that I think the current vaccines in use in the United States, specifically the mRNA vaccines,
Yeah.
there have been no widely released studies on J&J since the Delta wave.
Right. So it's just because it had such poor uptake too, and then these various
Issues.
that they publicized. Basically, they didn't get J&J didn't give enough money to the to
the feds.
campaigns.
So I'm going to leave J&J out of it.
Right,
and
right.
if you want to do a podcast, if anybody wants to hear a podcast about J&J versus mRNA,
Yeah.
we can do that. But
are you thinking?
I'm not doing that today.
Are you thinking that it's likely more effective or less effective?
I think the J&J, I'll say this much. I think the J&J has more effectiveness long term than the mRNA vaccines do.
Interesting. Okay.
I do not.
You read the studies. I don't keep up as nearly as
Right.
well.
And again, that is my guess based on what I've read.
Yeah.
There are not
Current studies.
a lot of current studies on J&J.
Yeah.
So like we always see J&J, we always see Pfizer, Moderna up with updated like guidelines and news about how effective they are against this virus, against this variant, and not this variant, this subvariant, and this subvariant too.
The stock ticker at the bottom of the screen.
Right. It's just, there's constant information about where you can find some data.
Right.
All you have to do is Google, or just do a search. Whereas J&J, you have to dig and dig hard, and there isn't that much when you've dug. Okay.
Yes,
So my
yes.
guess is it has some staying power long term, based on what I've read. But speaking directly to Pfizer and Moderna mRNA vaccines, I would be happy to say on the record that they are roughly 50% protection, even this far out. Just because a lot of people who have been vaccinated and are being exposed regularly aren't getting sick that they know of. They are. So in other words,
they're actually being exposed to new variants as well.
And they're being exposed to new variants as well. And what's happening is, whether or not they get sick is actually immaterial. They may well be getting sick.
Right.
None of them are getting severe disease. None of them are going to the hospital.
Right.
This, like, roughly half that aren't, like, they think they have allergies. They have whatever discomfort.
And we're seeing, we'll talk more about that later, but we're seeing a lot of that.
Various discomfort and whatnot.
Yes.
But,
people don't even know they have COVID.
Right. So they don't even know they have COVID.
A lot of people
right?
don't even currently know.
So that sort of half, the vaccine has protected them from being really sick.
Yes.
Right? I'm not going to hazard a guess at how small the number is that are not contracting any variant at all from mRNA vaccines at this point. I'm not going to hazard a guess. I think it's really small. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of those vaccinations are a year old, are 9 months old, et cetera, at this point.
Yeah.
The other half are getting sick and have only the smallest advantage against long COVID over people who are unvaccinated. Mm. So I think it's fair to throw around the number that the vaccines are 50% effective late May 2022.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
And I think you could argue very strongly that their effectiveness is much lower. I don't think you could make a strong argument that their effectiveness is much higher.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's where I think we are with vaccines. And because they reduce the number of people in hospital beds and not the number of people getting sick exactly, I'm not calling it a COVID mitigation, right? Mm-hmm. It's a hospital stabilization mitigation.
Yes.
Right?
That it's like it's like it's kind of like a financial bailout for the banks, right?
It's
the
like
foam the runway for the banks, but not the homeowners. It's just like that.
It's just like that. Let's just keep
the
hospitals open.
The medical institutions functioning, which, by the way, they are technically functioning. That's a whole other podcast, is the absolute disarray of the medical industry right now. Yeah, that they're essentially on life support.
So mitigations would look like ventilation, filtration, masking, elevated UV indoors.
Yes.
Reduced group size, work from home, payment to stay home if you're sick,
right,
for 14 days.
Absolutely.
Right. So that's what mitigation would look like.
Universal sick leave.
Universal sick leave.
Paid sick leave.
That's what would be mitigating.
Test to return.
Test to return, all those things. And even just, God help us, just contact tracing, just some fucking contact tracing would be a mitigation, right?
It's a very strange thing happened where I've seen my employer basically saying they're going to take over the role of contact tracing and notifying people. And, I'm not going to, I need a job, right? But I'm not going to argue. But I did say in the forum that, I just don't think this should be the
employer's job
the remit of employers. I think it raises troubling
questions.
Privacy concerns, HIPAA concerns, et cetera.
Foundational ethical concerns.
Right. So, but I do believe they are, because I keep seeing business units like go on alert, and people masking again, or people people going home to be sick,
right.
So I do see that happening, and we've been notified repeatedly,
Right.
So they are doing something. Is it
right?
Yeah.
They're doing something. Is it enough? Is it the right thing? Good questions.
Yeah. But even if they're doing everything that a public health department is normally supposed to do, I think there's a legitimate ethical concern about this being the work of the role of an employer.
Right.
Yeah. It's like the same way that I believe that healthcare should be socialized.
Not like attached to your
health,
job.
Right. And public health should be socialized. Instead we have, healthcare is attached to your job, and now public health is attached to your job as well. And that's not better.
What? Yeah, not an improvement. So still on point number 2, absent any context at all, any context whatsoever, I actually believe that eradication, elimination, mitigation, I'm not going to count the fake category, they're morally neutral. They don't, like, one's not morally superior to the other. Let me give you some context. I don't see a good reason for us to engage an eradication strategy against hand, foot, and mouth disease.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, I don't think it's
like when you're talking about cost benefit, and also like
right.
What's the, how many lives are you saving? How much discomfort are you saving?
Exactly.
But I also feel that way about chickenpox. I think we fucked that up big time.
Oh yeah, chickenpox is not a good scene.
Another...
But that's another podcast for another time. But chickenpox, I don't think there's any reason for us to engage in an eradication strategy against chickenpox. And similarly, we have to ask ourselves, right? And this, I think, really only comes into play, but it is a philosophical concern. What are we doing when we engage in genocide against a virus?
That's interesting.
What are we doing to ourselves?
What niche are we opening up for?
Right.
But I would also say that when we talk about like eradication of this thing, unless we're going to make these a universal program, coordinated across states, across nations, across continents.
Right. It took a long time, and that's effectively what smallpox was.
But unless we're talking that, we're not actually talking eradication, because there's always going to be some remote
place where
there'll
be a remote holdout.
Where it's burning through the population, and then someone
contacts them.
Someone from like a WHO or CDC person or anyone, or
thought I'd bring some viruses.
Visitor,
hello.
And honestly, again, another subject, but I really want to see us denormalize the amount of international travel that people routinely do.
Oh, it's vulgar.
It's
absolutely vulgar.
And even domestic travel.
Yeah.
I think it's insane, and it's not sustainable, certainly climate-wise and carbon-wise, but also not virus-wise, not public health-wise.
Right. And it never was.
No, it's just we've been kind of in a bubble of, we could afford it, and we didn't. We talked ourselves into thinking. I found some on sale. Yeah, like I got a $60 ticket to fly to New Orleans.
So I did. Had dinner, came back.
Yeah.
So as strategies, so I'm not trying to vilify a specific strategy as not okay. I think mitigating hand, foot, and mouth is fine.
Yes.
I think it's 100% okay.
Well, having seen it burn through us, actually, I think we've had 2 outbreaks of it, and I've gotten it. And personally, I don't think it was that bad. Yeah. It was an annoyance for the kids.
And most of the kids didn't get it the second time?
Right.
There was one child.
We had a household with kids who had been exposed and people who hadn't been exposed. And the ones whose immune systems were naive to hand, foot, and mouth got it, and our kids just had very, very either no symptoms or very mild symptoms.
Mild symptoms for a day,
right?
And then they moved on.
And you and I think, had very, very mild symptoms the second time as well. So clearly we had established a reasonable immunity against it.
Right.
How long that lasts, I don't really know.
Good question. And honestly, I don't know that question even matters. We're talking about
doesn't matter that much because it's entirely a childhood virus, really.
Right. And we're talking about hand, foot, and mouth. Right. Which appears to, we've experienced it for a long time. We have a lot of data. It doesn't appear to cause any harm, lasting harm that we are aware of. Just on and on.
Right. There's never heard of long hand, foot, and mouth.
No.
I guess it could be harmful in someone who is very immune compromised.
Exactly. And
so probably could fifths, I guess. But
and that's why we have strong mitigations around people we know to be immune compromised. Yeah. Many of these things are harmful to people who are immune compromised.
Right.
So, just to be clear, I'm not saying that we should only ever engage an eradication strategy against a disease or even a novel disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, and I think...
Although novel is worrying because we don't know the long...
Because we don't know the long-term core. Right. Yeah, right. But I will say that in this context and from the get-go, the only moral thing for us to do is eradication, which is what Asian countries did
with COVID,
with SARS-1.
Yes, yeah. Is it really eradicated, or we don't know of any Any
We don't know of any cases of SARS-1 for more than 10 years.
fascinating.
Right.
Okay.
So that strategy of eradication is possible with the coronavirus?
So SARS itself, SARS-1,
Yeah.
did not then proceed to spin off
And
variants for dozens, for
yes.
for years and years and years.
Yes. And people keep saying, wow.
Which is good because actually this family of virus has this characteristic of mutating like motherfuckers, right? Much faster than other
all the damn time
viruses.
Right. It's their evolutionary advantage is their ability to mutate so quickly.
Yeah.
So
we should be very happy that we don't have
SARS-1
like 100 variants of SARS-1 that
just
have burned through
us and been circulating long term.
Instead, you have some ancestor of probably a common ancestor in a animal reservoir, right?
Zoological reservoir.
Yeah.
So that was our only moral strategy, given what we know. We have, even in January of 2020, in December of 2019, we had the data we needed to make a moral judgment about the strategy to take. And the only thing that
should have needed it was enough data. We just weren't.
We had the data. We didn't want to talk about it. We didn't want to address it. We didn't want to consider it.
Right.
The only thing that put the brakes on Western governments to actually do something was looking at the data of what would happen if everyone got sick with this at the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
What it would look like in our hospitals. And the only reason Sweden could consider this is their universal healthcare policy.
So was flatten the curve, therefore, like an immoral strategy? Because that's the strategy that I was promoting it, literally telling people about and reading about in March 2020.
I think that was the most moral strategy within the Overton window.
Right, because there was literally no possibility that we were going to engage the kind of travel restrictions and lockdowns that needed to happen.
That needed to happen
in February and January.
Right. Well, and here's the thing: before it was here,
right,
the types of restrictions necessary would have been very small.
Yes,
extremely limited to keep, because
people in the United States didn't suffer gravely because of the mitigation, because of what we needed to do to keep SARS out of the country.
No.
I mean, I'm sure some travelers were inconvenienced.
They were kind of pissed off. They had to skip a trip, miss a trip, etc.
Right.
They couldn't come in when they wanted to.
But it wasn't like you're not going to be able to eat for a month.
No.
Or you're not going to be able to leave your home.
It wasn't like your grocery bill's going to double.
Your gas prices are going to
go through the roof. The gas would cost more than an hour's worth you get paid for. An hour's wages. Yeah. So the things that we need to do in January, February to stop Seattle from blowing up.
Right.
And actually that needed to happen in December.
Yeah.
The things we need to do at those points were not invasive, were not lockdowns, were not hard. They were inconvenient. There was nothing that was anything more than inconveniencing travelers.
Mm-hmm.
And
we know people who sort of just got in just under the window of travel, when flights were restricted.
Getting restricted. Yeah. So that's what we could have done, and that could have stopped it from grabbing a foothold here, but that would have required international cooperation, the likes of which the West is not...
to think about?
Like to think about, or that doesn't comport well with our values.
Yeah.
So...
such as they are.
So that's what we didn't do.
Yeah.
We didn't take those upstream precautions to stop it from coming here in the first place, and then support the efforts throughout Asia to stop it from moving west or east.
Mm-hmm.
So those were policy decisions. And again, it's not a matter of personal response. It's not about you deciding out of the virtue in your own heart, you know what, I'm not going to travel to Wuhan right now. It seems like the wrong thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We won't let you because it's going to hurt other people. Maybe you'll be fine. You know what? Some people got the original strain and they were fine. Still fine today. No long COVID, nothing.
Yeah.
That's not the point.
Right.
The point is the harm that you would cause to the rest of us.
Right.
Which brings me to my final point. There's so much more I have to say, but this is my final big point.
I'm just like vibrating in my chair because I want to go off on 20 digressions. I'm actually writing down notes about other digressions.
So number one, not a matter of personal responsibility. This is a matter of leadership and policy.
Yes.
Matter of governance and policy.
Yes.
Number two,
bring it home,
eradication eradication was the only moral strategy we ever should have taken.
Yes.
It was actually still wide open to us as late as October of last year, October of 2021. It was still a wide open opportunity. Politically, we could have taken that path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And lastly, your virtue will not save you. This is not a matter of religious faith.
Oh, yeah.
This is not a matter of religious faith. The fact that you believe in the vaccine and you trust it is not going to keep you alive.
No.
The fact that you believe in the vaccine and you trust it is not going to keep your elderly mother alive.
Right.
You wore your mask into the restaurant. It's not an act of faith. It is not a ritual act. It's not magic.
Yeah, yeah. People treat it just like that.
But they treat it like magic.
This is a totem. We sprinkle the herbs. We wave the incense. We chant the words.
And I don't say this to denigrate magic and the practitioners who believe in magic.
Right.
I don't say this to denigrate faith at all. It is a different metaphysical reality than this.
Right.
I say this because you are practicing, many people I see are practicing a religion around this, and they are practicing magic around this, and this is not a matter of virtue, faith, and magic.
Yeah, or which tribe you're in.
It doesn't matter which tribe you're in.
Right, and that's what I see. Everyone is like, which media bubble you're in, which political tribe if you're affiliated with, it's like your school colors.
Right. And if you become ill, and if you fall ill and admit to illness, that's understood to be blasphemy.
Well, this is something that's weird and disturbing now, which is essentially the number of people who are affronting not being sick because
it would be blasphemy to admit it.
It would be blasphemy to admit it. You don't want to dirty the hem of Pfizer's garment, with your realization or your
lived experience
that the vaccine did not protect you.
Right.
And if you acknowledge that long COVID is real, you've also sinned against the purity of the one great
The CDC
vaccine.
has now admitted that 1 in 5 people will experience long COVID.
Yes. So
long COVID as defined narrowly.
Yes. So take that number and say, oh, okay, 90% then.
Actually, we do have data indicating about 80% in 3 months.
Yeah.
And by data, I mean if you interview people who've had a COVID infection at 12 weeks post their acute phase, and you do not indicate that you're speaking to them about long COVID and just say, I'd like to see how you're doing. Have you experienced X, Y,
right. Try to
Z,
do a neutral study.
A, B, and C.
But this also assumes that you've got the correct set of symptoms.
80%. Well, no, if you take the broad list of symptoms, and the list is broad.
Yes.
And if you interview them at 12 weeks, 80% of them will say yes. Oh, and yeah, that too. Yes. Yes. They will acknowledge having 2 or more symptoms of long COVID.
And some of the ones that are so incredibly common, including like one of my most common is just fatigue, unusual fatigue.
Unusual fatigue. Not like, I partied all last night and it's hard for me to wake up this morning.
I love being out in the garden for a day, which happens rarely, but I'm out in the garden, I'm doing a lot of work and I come in and my muscles are sore in a good kind of way and I'm tired and I sleep like a rock,
Yeah, it's great stuff.
Or go for a long hike or something. I sleep better. I feel better. Yeah. That's not what I mean.
Nope.
No, I mean like just tired and spacey all day long and like literally nodding off even when I got a normal amount of sleep.
Normal amount of caffeine, normal amount of sleep. And you're just kind of nodding off and can't quite focus.
And people are fronting about this not happening to them because I see it happening to my coworkers.
You're looking
everywhere.
At it. Everywhere. You're looking at them all.
I'm having like when we, a year ago when we had our Zoom calls, no one was like lost as to what we were meeting about or what we were talking about. And now like several of them who I know have had COVID recently are frustrated and lost and
You can't figure out what's happening.
Yeah, and they're saying, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Wait a minute." And I have to repeat things 3 times, and I'm making notes, what I said. So, when I'm having a good day and they're having a bad day, it's incredibly visible.
Yes.
Right. And it must be visible to them the other way around.
When you're having a bad day. Right.
Because I've reached the same way I'm sort of coming out about realizing that I've always been autistic.
Yeah.
I've reached the no fucks to give stage in that I will just, at my previous job, I never, ever wanted to admit feeling impaired or like in my work at all.
Oh, right.
Because I knew that my supervisor there would just was waiting to pounce on me and to accuse me of this and that and blame, or whatever. But he was trash, by the way. Go on. Yeah. Well, in my current job, I feel like we have, in a way, partly because we're distant, right?
Right.
Because I'm remote, I feel more confident about saying, you know what, a lot of stuff is going wrong in our lives, and there's a lot of weird stressors happening and a lot of distractions, and we've all been kind of sick. Right. And I'm not 100% this week.
This week I'm 100%.
I was better last week. You saw I got all these tickets finished. I did a lot of good work, but I'm really down this week.
Maybe a little better next week. We'll keep trying.
I felt much more free about saying that.
Yes.
Even in like an open forum like a company-wide forum.
Yeah.
I shared an article that said not long ago, and the subject was, your coworkers with kids want you to know that they are not okay. They're not doing okay.
No.
Yeah. So I got a lot of thanks, private notes of thanks for sharing this.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's the thing. If we don't give people, tip them off that it's long COVID, right? They will freely admit, 80% of people who've just had COVID admit 3 months out, they're still sick.
Yeah,
right?
In unusual ways.
In unusual ways.
Not normal for me.
Not normal for me ways. So I think it's reasonable to take that as a running number, that 80% of the people that you know that have had COVID are having a hard time 3 months later.
Yeah.
20% of them, according to the CDC, are having a hard time 6 months later.
Right. And we're also we're starting to accumulate data about reinfection. We're starting to see studies come out about reinfection.
Yeah. And the vaccine doesn't stop reinfection either.
And
just to be clear,
it's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
There are people who've had COVID 4 or 5 times now.
Yep.
And lots who have had it 3 times.
Lots of people had it 3 times.
Right.
It's a bad scene.
And the novelty of this virus means that we absolutely do not
idea what that means.
What this is doing to your organs, your immune system, your brain, your lungs, your heart.
We have no idea.
Yeah. No, it's.
But we do know that it is vascular and attacks those systems.
Yeah.
That much we know.
Right.
What it does, what the long-term damage looks like, your body's ability to repair, we don't have that information.
We've got some really worrying things that aren't thoroughly backed by a lot of study and data yet, include about telomeres length and premature aging. And of course, and what I'm seeing among my friends and whatnot is a little something I like to call sudden death.
Oh yeah, that's a thing. That's happening too.
Like the 35-year-old who was in fine health but just died of a heart attack for no apparent reason. Or even the older person who was, just doing the same thing they had done every week of their lives and had a clean bill of health, passed a physical, no history of this or that. And I've been hearing anecdotally about people with kidney failure, we've heard about the diabetes. I haven't heard much about that recently.
Nope. A lot of hepatitis in little kids.
Yeah. So the hepatitis thing also.
And when I say a lot of hepatitis, I'm talking about
10 to 100 times more than we normally see in the background year.
Honestly, the hepatitis we're experiencing in kids right now, we're calling it like an epidemic of hepatitis because it doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
Like what we're looking at, this doesn't happen.
It's rare. I mean, it happens.
Rare.
But it's like they had three cases in the UK in a given year, or something.
Yeah, if that.
Right.
If that. I mean,
and now there's 30 or 50.
It's like 3 cases annually worldwide.
Yeah.
So
in young children.
In young children under 5s.
Right.
Primarily under 5s. The older kids too, but...
I'll tell them about the dog farts.
Okay. As quickly as I can.
Yeah.
So the deal is we're seeing unusual cases of viral hepatitis in young children.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be wrong about the order of magnitude because I always am. I'm going to say 75. It may be 750, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot more than we would ever see normally.
Background data,
right?
Sort of signal, yeah.
Right? It's so much more.
Right.
We have data from SARS-1 that rare sequelae from SARS-1 infection is liver failure.
This is something, again, that if you were reading the papers about SARS-1...
Document it.
But the thing is, fortunately, the number of cases were so low that this is a rare occurrence. But given that we now our numerator is enormous.
So much larger. It's less rare. India, in 2021, just a year ago, noted that they saw in their pediatric COVID patients who had been unvaccinated, principally some older children as well, or children who people who had been vaccinated, they noted liver damage.
Yeah.
Months after their infection, they would suddenly have liver damage. So there's widespread, but not what I would say broadly accepted in practice, in medical practice. So there are things that we've known in medical practice and use all the time. There are things that are clearly understood in the literature that have not made their way into practice.
Yeah.
This is one of those things, like I said, it was documented in pediatric cases a year ago. Hasn't made it into practice yet. So now we see these cases blow up all over the world after India's wave last year.
Right. And you know what? Biden was just praising India for their handling of the COVID pandemic. Like just recently, he was like, they lost more than any country in the world.
It was absolutely devastating.
It was
absolutely devastating.
Piles and piles of bodies.
It's awful. Just horrendous. But I will tell you that they rolled out, when they rolled out their vaccine, they had a vaccine for 2-year-olds out of the gate.
Yeah. They didn't dither around
they didn't
and say
screw around
we
with that.
Can't use this in
People
children.
rolled out their vaccine, they rolled it out for 2 and up.
Because they had seen something they had seen that we would have rarely seen since, the bubonic plague, right?
In children, right.
As far as like the corpses everywhere.
Yes. So there's this data exists. It's in the literature. It's well documented. It's peer reviewed. It's gold standard studies.
Yeah.
When we started seeing these cases in the UK, in the United States, in clusters, the European continent, Australia, etc., then a lot of these minimizer doctors are like, I wonder why this is happening. This is mysterious and strange. What could it be? Why could this be happening? Do you think it's adenovirus? Maybe it's adenovirus. Maybe it was the lockdowns and immunity debt, and they didn't get sick.
Oh, that's another thing.
And now they're being exposed to all these things in school, and they're just getting sick, and it causes liver failure sometimes.
Right. Yeah. These papers are coming out. These studies that are written basically to consider. They're structured. Right. To consider basically every theoretical cause.
Every theoretical cause except for COVID.
And, that's great. We should consider every theoretical cause.
We should.
But if you're not going to consider COVID sequelae then what the hell are you doing?
What are you doing? What are you even doing?
Practicing politics and not science.
You're practicing politics and not science. And so, and at one point, maybe it's the lockdowns. Maybe it's adenovirus. Maybe it's... I don't know. You know what? All these kids had dogs. Maybe it's dog farts. I wish I was kidding.
Well, you really mean that basically they think there could be pathogens in dog feces that are being spread by contact with feces or flatulence or canine flatulence.
Canine flatulence. Those pathogens may have made these young children ill and caused liver failure. let's consider it. And so they did. For several of these children, we still do not have any blood serology on COVID infection.
Wow.
So they didn't even collect the data. And they made a conscious decision not to collect any COVID data for some reason. Now, still more data is coming out, and several agencies have said, "Oh, so this is a known COVID sequelae in a minority of cases." So, of course, it came to the surface eventually, but in the meanwhile, there are children who died and got liver transplants because they could not get appropriate treatment for their presentation of liver failure.
What would appropriate treatment be?
Okay, so I'm fuzzy on this, but there's another. I'm calling it liver failure, hepatitis. There's a number of reasons people get hepatitis, right? It can be alcohol. Oh, that was one thing. At one point, they were saying, well, maybe all these children are being abused, right?
Being like what? Force-fed alcohol? And then
God only knows what,
cirrhosis?
some kind of negligence and whatnot. But there's alcohol. There's various hepatitis viruses, right? There's also like cancers and things like that cause hepatitis, or basically an inflamed liver to occur, right?
Yeah.
And for some of them, you treat with steroids. Some of them you treat with an anti-inflammatory, a steroid, and some of them you treat as a viral illness, and you use antivirals. So if you give antivirals when you need steroids, the person's liver hepatitis progresses either to death or needing a transplant. If you give steroids when you need antivirals, what's that?
Maybe you can head that off.
Maybe you want to like not use the wrong treatment.
The biggest gun first, or the wrong. Yeah.
Right.
Don't go on the wrong path.
Don't go down the wrong path first, because the liver disease will progress, possibly to death or to need of a liver transplant.
Yeah.
Several of these children did need liver transplants, and at one point the minimizers were actually saying, well, worst case scenario, these children can just get liver transplants.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking,
the average life expectancy after a child
pediatric liver transplant
is what, 15 years?
Tops.
Yeah.
So if you're 2 years, I mean, really?
Right.
So you're really saying,
we've solved the problem. In other words, you got them out of the hospital bed.
You got them out of the hospital bed, which is that's the only thing minimizers understand to be the problem.
They're going to need lifetime anti-immunosuppressives, right?
Which will make it very easy for them to catch COVID again.
Right. And then they're also going to die very young. You know, because I've seen this with pediatric heart transplants too.
As well,
People don't live a long time.
No.
Maybe they get,
maybe they get some good years. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have years. But what would have been ideal would be to keep their livers healthy.
Yes.
Right? Would it be to treat them early and well?
It also, it's so, I can't make a moral judgment about it, but it's so sad to watch these kids knowing they're going to die, and have to get progressively more and more
frail.
I mean, sometimes they get more than one heart,
exactly,
or more than one liver.
I have made a moral judgment about it. I wouldn't get an organ like that from one of my children. I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I'm not going to kill someone else so my child can live.
Right.
And also, the prognosis is still actually not very good, even in 2022, especially in 2022. So, but that's me. That's where I'm at. But that was the whole dog farts causes hepatitis journey in the pandemic discourse. That we were actually there. We were at that point. Minimizers are like, it could be. It has to be anything but COVID. It's not COVID. COVID doesn't do that. It's not dangerous.
When you understand the ideology of the pro-vax promoters and COVID minimizers,
yes,
then you see it everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And so many articles, so many pieces of writing, so many editorials and whatnot that sound perfectly progressive and reasonable and liberal and all these, allegedly good things. And they're crazy. They're deeply immoral. They're rooted in just...
they're not crazy. They're depraved.
Okay. Depraved. You're right. They're morally depraved.
They're morally depraved.
And the people writing them if they don't know better, they ought to know better.
I don't know better.
Yeah. But I do want to, you mentioned one thing that I want to spin out just a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But I think you've gotten your main, you've gotten through your
I've
main
said my
points.
piece.
You've said
my
your
main
piece.
point.
But I do want to talk about something else I'm seeing, which is you mentioned this theory now, because this is happening. People are noticing that childhood diseases are sort of roaring back, right? Mm-hmm. Like they're seeing a lot of cases of sick kids with illnesses that normally, like MERS, is that what the...
MERS was the Middle East respiratory syndrome.
Okay, never mind. I'm sorry. What's the respiratory illness in kids that sometimes kills them?
The rhinovirus?
It's like an annual virus that's been in recent years. It's gotten quite bad.
Oh, norovirus?
No,
that's about
makes
the stomach.
You throw up.
I think it's a rhinovirus. There's a specific one that they vaccinate for.
That can like go through a school and actually kill a couple kids in a school.
Yeah.
Well, so these diseases are spiking, right?
Yep.
These like sort of common childhood infections, especially congregate setting childhood infections, are spiking, and people very serious people.
Yep.
Writing in the very serious Atlantic or New York Times or whatever are floating the theory that basically because people have been in lockdown, have been isolated, that they haven't had their immune systems challenged enough by these viruses, and therefore when they're exposed, they get very sick. And what I know of, which isn't necessarily that much, and what I read from people who are actually virologists and immunologists,
right,
and not the same population, right?
Right, the Venn diagrams don't overlap.
Right.
The diagrams, the circles don't overlap.
Is that that's bullshit.
Straight up horse shit.
Is that like not being exposed? I mean, okay, yes, there is this aspect of it, like if you've never been exposed to chickenpox before.
Yep.
Then you'll get it, and if you have, when it comes around, and if you have been, you likely won't. So with some viruses, there is that,
and it's certainly true that like your response to chickenpox after puberty is very different than your response before puberty.
Right?
Sure, yeah.
But so there are some specific viruses that actually you want to catch young, and then you are immune. But that's not the same as this idea that they're floating, which is basically if you're not constantly getting slightly sick. Then you can't stay healthy.
That's horseshit.
That is like a hormesis theory. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
So the hormesis theory is the idea that like if you're constantly exposed to like low levels of radiation, then you're safe against like getting cancer when you're exposed to radiation.
To like greater radiation.
Right. That actually strengthens you.
Yeah.
And that is not true of... It may be sort of true of some viruses in the way that I've outlined. Yeah. But it's certainly not true in general.
It is true that the core of vaccinology, the core of vaccine theory, is that you want to expose your immune system to train it to respond.
Exactly.
To I want to say irritant, but that is not the word I'm looking for at all. To a pathogen. Yeah. Right? So there is that, and that is true. It is also true that young children who are developing T cells and developing immune memory and building an immune system need to be exposed to many things. I don't mean as newborns, to be clear.
Yeah.
Typically, the triggers are kind of locked together with development, that when your immune system is ready for these challenges, when you start to crawl. Right? Yes. So you don't really want to like force crawling, or you want to let these things emerge at their own time. So around the time a child is developmentally ready to crawl and walk is around the time they're ready to face immune challenges and start building T cells and immune memory and sort of building out an immune system that's robust.
Right. That's all. That's all true.
And we also saw something, and allergists discovered that children who were like, their homes were too clean, right?
Right, which I realized that basically when I was, this is, a digression that I think reinforces your point here.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I had constant hay fever and allergies.
Right.
And all the authorities told my mom, oh, you have to...
keep your home spotless.
Yeah, keep your home spotless. Change the sheets. He was probably changing my sheets 3 times a week, including the pillowcases and all that. Because I was allergic to dust. We got new pillows because like feather pillows would set me off and all this. But now we know that likely my symptoms would have been better if I had been exposed more,
and also younger, right?
To a more, in other words, if my home environment had been dirtier, and if I had done more things.
And I don't mean squalor.
Right. No, but like if
squalor.
I'd spent more time getting filthy and scratched up in creeks and rocks and plants and
all
bugs
those things.
And,
they stimulate
up to my elbows in dirt. Yeah.
So they stimulate your histamine response in a way so it can regulate.
Right.
So it can say, okay, this is safe and normal.
Right.
This is not safe and normal.
Right.
And like knows when to go
It's got
off.
something to do. It doesn't get bored and go looking for pollen to like, oh my God, you're going to die. And make,
And that's your histamine system and not your immune system. I mean, it's like a part of your immune system.
Sure.
So that's a histamine response we're talking about.
Right.
So being exposed,
my nemesis, histamines.
being exposed that way as a young child to various histamines.
It helps keep you from having chronic allergies.
It helps keep you from having common allergies.
Right.
And also as part of that process of building out a robust immune system.
Right. But we know also that like our years in lockdown, suddenly our kids were not sick every week. And reading back through my journals from 2018 when I kept like a weekly journal,
all the friggin' time.
Our kids we had viruses probably 20 times that year.
In a year.
That affected the adults too.
Yeah.
Right. That affected us. So we were all sick.
So I'm good with that. That's cool. Like leaving that behind. I'm all right.
I think that's okay.
That's okay.
I don't think that makes us vulnerable to sudden, extremely severe infection next year.
And I think also the most important thing is we don't think that, but also there's no evidence to that effect.
There's no evidence for that.
There's no evidence to that.
I was just looking it up. It's RSV. Syncytial something.
Right.
That is an occasionally fatal, severe respiratory illness that kids get in schools.
Kids get in schools, right.
So
that...
people, that's why people are like
oh my goodness,
RSV and they're dying from it.
They're dying from it.
The more likely theory, I believe, is that their immune systems have been weakened by multiple infections with COVID.
Right, because they weren't actually, because that's the thing, they weren't actually locked down.
Right.
So, I mean, that's actually the biggest sort of like fly in the ointment for this argument. You are referring to populations that never actually locked down.
And we're only just starting to understand the long-term damage that COVID may be doing to the immune system. And I don't want to be hysterical about it. I don't want to be like, alarmist, but we do have evidence that it damages the immune system. We don't know exactly how bad and for how long and what kind of repair work your body is capable of doing to bring to normalize your immune function.
We don't know, but we do know it damages your immune system.
Yes.
And when your immune system is damaged, you're susceptible to things you would not be otherwise.
Right. So maybe you would have just had the sniffles from your RSV in school, and now you're on a ventilator. Right.
So we do know that pathway exists for COVID to damage your immune system and then make you weaker against assaults that your immune system would have had no problem with.
Yeah.
We have that information. Actually, we have that data.
So
there are many things.
That's the thing I wanted to spin out was this new theory that, everyone's getting sick because we've been so healthy.
Because we locked down, we were so healthy. No, there are things that are true about developing your immune system, about exposure to histamines, and about exposure to soil.
Right.
There are
soil
studies.
Bacteria, common bacteria that your body should be ready to fight off.
Right.
And should be doing it frequently that sort of muscle flexed,
Soil bacteria. That's an important point. It's bacteria. Your body needs to be re-exposed.
It's different than viruses.
So That's all true. That exists. That body of data
are half
exists.
bacteria anyway.
Right.
So.
But this assertion is just bunk. It's just nonsense.
Yeah,
it's minimizer spinoff. It's minimizer chaff.
Sort of taking a few ideas that people are willing to nod along with. Coming to
That's
the
right.
wrong.
The lockdowns were terrible.
Coming to the wrong conclusion.
They harmed us. That's right. You know
and
they didn't.
And it's tied into the anti-vax woo.
Well, it's tied into the anti-vax woo, but it's being promulgated by pro-vaxxers.
By the pro-vaxxers. So there's this, yeah.
And how should I say? The thing that the pro-vaxxers don't want I'm giving them their own name. The minimizers don't want to admit is we never actually had a lockdown.
Right. Not a significant one.
Nothing significant. Nothing like people are like screaming about in China or North Korea or wherever their boogeyman is now.
When
none of that's happened here.
When I was sent home from work officially, I worked from home for literally 1 week.
That was it.
And then the following Monday after that, everyone was fired. Was furloughed. Right. And even on day one, right, we were given a form that basically said we were essential workers. So that if we did drive to the office and we were stopped in which we didn't know exactly, were they going to be stopping people driving around? They didn't. They didn't really do that. Right. Not in any significant way. But we would have just shown them this letter. An essential worker. Well, please carry on. Go infect your coworkers.
It's very essential. Very essential.
Right. But instead it was entirely class-based, what they did. So the manufacturing people, who honestly, with a little setup work, some of them could have been doing their manufacturing work at home, at least some of it. Not final assemblies and tests and whatnot. But they could have done some of it from any workbench, any kitchen table even, for a while. They still had to come in and work in close quarters.
Right.
And but the engineers, who are basically of a different social class and like worker class, right? Yeah. Got to work from home.
Yes.
Mostly.
So that,
of course,
that's not a real lockdown.
Then everyone got to work on their gardens,
which is wonderful.
It's wonderful.
But that's not a real lockdown.
No. The furlough was sort of an inadvertent lockdown. Right?
But there was no enforcement of a lockdown, right?
No.
Because ostensibly, if you're furloughed,
you could be out doing whatever.
Sure. Right? Yeah. There was no kind of enforced lockdown.
No.
Like that. So in other words, I'm just
kind of wistful about how that was the best vacation of my life, and I know it wasn't a vacation.
Yeah. No. It was a good time. Those were good times.
While the world was going to hell.
The idea, though, that anywhere, at any place in the United States, something like people being confined to their homes for an extended period of time, not allowed to use public parks, beaches, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there were some places where the play structures were cordoned
locked off. Yeah, sure.
But the park was open.
Right. And people think like stores insisting that people wear masks
was a lockdown.
Was a lockdown, right?
So actually, not even doing a real lockdown,
right,
had significant impact. Right.
Of course.
So imagine what we could have done.
Well over 1 million dead. So
imagine what an actual lockdown would have done.
It's hard to imagine something like that even happening in our sort of
in the United States
American context. And that's what our friend Chris was saying from the beginning: is that, the United States is going to have unique challenges trying to navigate this,
right?
Because there's this,
and actually none of them are the virus itself.
It's a broken society. It's broken in the sense that people don't care for each other. They don't work for each other. They don't serve each other. They don't keep each other safe.
That was my last literal last word on my third point.
Okay.
It's not magic or religion.
Yeah.
It's knowledge and trust.
Yes.
We have to be able to trust our institutions, and we can't.
And each other.
Yeah. And we have to know what's going on.
Right. And all of that's been severely compromised or twisted.
Right. So your allegiance to your tribe isn't, you have to know the data.
Yeah.
You have to have access to the data, either raw or distilled. And you have to trust the people who are telling you.
Okay, do you want to wind up there?
I'm winding up there.
I wind up there. I'm going to play the outro, and I may sing again. We may have to do a couple takes of this.
Do what you got to do.
Home is where I want to be, but I guess I'm already there. I come home, she lifted up her wings. I guess that this must be the place. All right. Later, everyone.
Till next time.
Bye.